Hello everyone, welcome into Above My Pay Grade. My name is Eric. Thanks for tuning in. If you could hit that like button, hit subscribe, really helps out the channel. It is my favorite time of the week, and that is answering your questions. Got a lot of smart ones. Really gets me thinking. So let's get started. Number one, from my all-time favorite username, Princess Consuela Banana Hammock. What are your thoughts on the Fed quietly bailing out Credit Suisse? And if you look into this, they actually gave swap lines to the Swiss National Bank. So, a couple things to understand. Number one, banks can create dollars, commercial banks, and when I say commercial banks, I mean like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, they can create dollars out of essentially nothing, okay? So they can create dollars. They don't have any reserve requirements. So if a bank needs dollars in the euro-dollar system, they can just go to another commercial bank. So why didn't Credit Suisse go to another commercial bank if that was the bank that the Fed was bailing out? So what happened was the Fed took swap lines and gave it to the Swiss National Bank, which is their Federal Reserve. And now commercial banks, every Wednesday, are going over to the Swiss National Bank as their counterparty. So instead of going to another commercial bank for dollars, they're going to the Swiss National Bank for dollars. Okay, so what? Why would a commercial bank, instead of going to another commercial bank, which is how it typically works, want to go to a Fed or a national bank? It all comes down to confidence. And it all comes down to counterparty risk. Because if you get your dollars from another commercial bank, what that means is there's counterparty risk of that bank going bust. Or if you give dollars to another counterparty, commercial bank, there's a risk of them going bust and not paying you back. And they're willing to accept that risk in regular times, but they're not willing to accept that risk now, loaning money to another bank. Now, why is that? Why is that? And that's why people are nervous, because now no other commercial bank is willing to loan money to Credit Suisse, maybe because they see their balance sheet. And commercial banks have to worry about a profit and loss statement. They can literally go out of business and go bankrupt. You know who doesn't have to worry about that? The Bank of Switzerland, or the Switzerland National Bank, or the Fed. So when it comes down to counterparty risk, there's no confidence in the system. If there's no confidence in the banking system, you've got to think, why is that? It's because their balance sheets are absolute trash. Okay? And you might also ask, why wouldn't the Fed just be the counterparty instead of the Swiss National Bank? Well, it's against the Federal Reserve Act for the Federal Reserve to help these international commercial banks. So they just do it with another central bank, and that's the same result. So, the Fed is very constrained, and they're very worried about following the rules. So they just go around them. But all that to say, that's a lot of words. What I'm trying to say is, within the commercial banking system, from Bank of America to Wells Fargo, I'm using American examples. If they needed money, if Bank of America needed money, and no other commercial bank's willing to loan it to them, there's a reason they're not willing to loan it to them, is all I'm saying. And that's what's going on in Switzerland, potentially Credit Suisse. No other commercial bank is willing to loan it to them, and that's because there is not trust in the system that they'll be paid back. Okay? A sign of things that are not good. Okay, that's all I'm trying to say. Hopefully I did a good job of explaining that. If you want a way more detailed explanation, George Gammon does a good job over on his channel. Way smarter than me. Okay, next question from Frog Feather. Are they renting rooms on Mars yet? In what ways do you connect your actual day-to-day neighbor to build community? And what kinds of things come to mind when you think of community, neighbors, or neighborhood? Worst comes to worst, neighbors will potentially be your best ally. Knowing them before that time would be an invaluable thing. I feel like I could do much better with this life hack, so any recommendations, cheers. Okay. So how do you build community? Well, I'm a Christian. I go to church. That's the way I build community in my local area. I could do a lot better in my neighborhood. You know, you see your neighbors, you just wave, you never talk. But an act of kindness without respecting or expecting anything in return often helps you get to know your neighbors, going out of your way. So I could do a lot better about that in my neighborhood. But the way I do that is through finding a local church and getting involved there. All right, third question from Extra Extra. Will your wife admit defeat to the public? Support from coast to coast for your mustache? Or will she be victorious? Now, it's been an epic battle, as you know, if you've followed my channel for any length of time. Mustache comes, and then it goes. And, you know, sometimes my wife threatens to Samson Delilah my mustache off in the middle of the night. But I think she's growing an affinity to it. All right? It kind of has this aura of testosterone, and she's slowly starting to like it. I could be totally making this up, but her vote counts a lot more. She reminds me every day, but maybe she's going to like it. Who knows? I'll make sure she watches this so she knows the support I have on YouTube. All right, fourth question from Melissa Harper. Good morning. I'm so glad the Economic Ninja turned me on to your page. You rock. Thank you very much. In your opinion, where is the best place to purchase silver or gold? I would turn you over to Financial Prepper, Stacy Taylor, I believe her name is. She is a gold bullion dealer. And there's a lot of ways you can buy gold, but I think you should educate yourself on it, and a dealer would be a good place to start with that. The way I do it is just dollar cost average through a company called One Gold. And once you get to your, let's say, an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver, you can redeem it, and they'll send it to you. Okay, that's how I do it, but not financial advice. I would look over at the Financial Preppers channel. They might be able to help you out way more than me, way better experts than I am. You have any questions on Bitcoin, I can definitely help you out there. Okay. Rebecca Pluta. Final question. Can you get out the cool, dry erase board or something visual and explain the importance of the yield curve? Fabulous question. Is there one yield curve we need to watch or multiple yield curves? Why is everyone saying, tells us everything and forecast the past, future, weather, etc.? Take us to school, please. Thanks, Eric. Also, is there a time, if there's time, does your mustache have its own published yield curve? Yes, it sure does. Love the mustache questions. Okay, so the yield curve. All right, so taking a look at this, I'll put it up on the screen here. It's important to understand, think about your mortgage. I like to relate things to mortgages because people understand those. If you get a 15-year mortgage, that normally has less of a interest rate, lower interest rate. If you get a 30-year mortgage, it has a higher interest rate. If you take a loan out on a car, same. Okay? Why is that? Because time is risk, right? The longer you give out somebody a loan, or the longer you give somebody a loan, the more you want to be compensated for that, because over time there is more risk. Hopefully that makes sense. So looking at this yield curve, over time, and we're looking at maturity down at the bottom in yield, one might assume if a government is selling a bond, whether that be 2 years, 30 years, etc., because they have different maturity dates, 30, 10, 20, 2, But if you are loaning the government money by buying a bond, you would want to be compensated for that longer duration. Make sense? Just like when a bank gives you a loan on your home, you'd want to be compensated for that. So a normal yield curve would say you would have a lower yield for 2 years on the lower end of the maturity, and a higher yield for a 30-year bond on the longer end of maturity. Makes sense. So obviously, inverted yield curve is the exact opposite. You have a higher yield on the short end and a lower yield on the long end. So, Eric, why does this matter to me? What does this tell us about the economy? Well, number one, people use this because every time this happens, if you look at this chart, every time a yield curve inverts, not every time, but very close to every time a yield curve inverts, we have a recession within 18 months after the yield curve inverts. But why would the yield curve invert is the question. Because in a free market, one might think, why in the world would you accept less money for a longer duration loan? That doesn't make any sense. And you would be correct. It doesn't make any sense. It's not really a free market phenomenon. What is happening is people are worried about a recession coming within the next 10 years, something like that, between the 2 and the 10-year yield. So in that 3 to 9 year mark, they're worried about a recession. And what happens when we have a recession? The Federal Reserve comes in and lowers interest rates. They pivot, right? And so these people are running to longer term bonds rather, and buying them up. So as you buy a bond, it lowers the interest rate because the demand is high. Therefore, the interest rate goes lower. And on the short end, demand is low, so the interest rate goes higher. So people are thinking that the Federal Reserve is going to have to pivot. And when they pivot, their bond will be more valuable. So as interest rates drop, the price of your bond that you bought, let's say it was a 10-year one, goes up. So it's essentially the market saying, we're worried about short-term, we're worried about, in the short to medium term, we are worried about a recession. That's what the inverted yield curve is saying. And we're worried about the Fed intervention in that system, meaning lowering interest rates. So they don't think they're going to lower interest rates in the short term, but in the medium term, between the 2 and 10, they think they're going to lower interest rates, which would drive up the price of the bond they bought, the 10-year bond or the 30-year. So it is an ominous sign, and the market's sniffing out the recession. They're sniffing out what the Fed is going to do, and the amalgamation of the whole market is saying, I think the Fed's going to pivot. So it's not really a free market phenomena, because in a free market, no one would ever accept less money for a longer duration, unless there's some big brother out there who could print money, buy bonds, lower yield or lower interest rates, yada yada yada. So this goes back to my overall point. The Fed actually screws up the economy more than anything else, because it doesn't allow for actual interest rates to count. Like it introduces artificially low interest rates that the free market would never introduce, because it has a money printer. Hopefully that made sense. But it's people expecting the Fed to pivot in the short term, or in the medium term rather, and therefore their bond's going to go up, like the 10-year, the 20-year, the 30-year. And in the short term, guess what we have today? We've got inflation. And so people don't want to buy those short-term bonds. Therefore, the interest rate is going up and the long term is going down. Hopefully that made sense. Sometimes this stuff can be uber confusing, but the big thing is it has correlated with a recession almost every time. All right, y'all. That's the last question. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you guys in the next one. Peace.